Welcome to God Talk Improv, a show where a rocket scientist and a medical doctor, who is also my pastor, talk about current topics in science and faith in an unplugged fashion in 15 minutes. So let's get started. Dr. Andy, welcome to the show, and please give us a topic.
Hey Doug, this is going to be a good improv, and we have a different kind of a show today because we actually got an interesting response from one of our atheists. Actually, this listener's an atheist. We have a lot of listeners that are atheists and agnostics. We get letters from them from time to time and comments, and we got an interesting, quite a long response from one of our atheists, and we'd like to respond and make an improv out of it because he actually brought up some really important topics.
Right. We have atheist friends,
Sure.
and we love to hear from them.
Absolutely.
And from our listeners, our atheist
All of our
listeners.
listeners, yeah.
We love to hear from you. Certainly go in and to our website, click on the to contact us, and we'd love to hear from you. So
yeah, we'd love to have as many responses as we can. It helps us to design better shows. It helps us to get feedback on things. And I'll tell you, some of the things that this particular person pointed out, one of our atheist listeners and friends, made some really good points. And so we want to recognize those, but then we want to give kind of a response, a rhetorical response to what he said, and try to defend what we meant. Because some things I think you misunderstood.
Well, sometimes we just send them an email back, but this time, this is a good enough,
Yeah, this was a pretty good letter, and he put some time into it. Yeah, we send a lot of them back, just emails, and try to respond, and I've spent a lot of time doing that in the last week, but I think this one deserves a little more formal response. I'll start out this way. I'll say, he tells us that when we did our show on the Angry Atheist, which, by the way, that was a popular show, we drummed up a little business with that, and he listened to that, and being an atheist, he pointed out some mistakes. And one thing he said was, Antony Flew. I mentioned Antony Flew, who was one of the most famous atheists of the 20th century. But I said that he became a theist, not an atheist. He was an atheist, his old philosophy career. And then in his late 70s, he became a theist, or a believer in God. Apparently, this listener misunderstood me. He said he admits that Antony Flew did indeed die a theist, but a deist specifically. And he makes the point that I left that out, and by that omission, I may have led people to believe that Antony Flew became a Christian. And I did not mean to do that, by the way.
Okay.
Totally. I know. I read Antony Flew's book. I've read it twice, actually, and it's a great read. Anybody should read it. Antony Flew, like I said, was a gentleman atheist, unlike some of the new horsemen.
Right.
But he did, in his later life, become a believer in a God. But he never went all the way to Christianity, that's true. He was a deist, which means he believes in a God that sort of created everything, but then just sort of walked away and doesn't interact with human beings. I think he died a deist, but he was a believer in some kind of God.
We call those type 1s. The type 1s are, you're okay, I'm okay, we all live together in harmony, right? So...
he wasn't a type 1, though, because...
He was a type 2?
Well, yeah, Antony Flew in his life before he was a deist. I mean, when he was a deist, he was fine. He got along. He said, I believe in God, I just got questions, about what type of God. But before that, he was a famous atheist who was a philosopher who wrote tons of books against God, but he did it in a gentlemanly way. So I guess you could call him a type 1. I don't know, maybe type 2. He argued with C.S. Lewis, but he did it in a way that was fun. I mean, like some of our listeners.
Right.
They talk to us. We have conversations, not hateful. We love to have it. It's interesting. It's it brings up good points. So anyway, Antony Flew was that kind of atheist, and he died a deist. Let me make sure I'm clear on that. Okay, not a Christian. Okay, and the second thing he said was, he said that I defined atheism perfectly initially, and I thought, oh, great. And then he said, but then you went around and misdefined it after that, mischaracterized it. So let me be clear. I said someone with a non-belief in God is an atheist, someone with a non-belief. And he says, you got it right on the spot when you said that.
Right.
He said, then you flipped it the very next sentence from being a rejection of a belief to being a positive belief that God does not exist. He says this is a mischaracterization. I'm a little confused by this with our listener, because to me, if you have a non-belief in God, okay, I realize that's not active, but you're still making a statement. I have no belief. When it comes to God, I just don't have any belief. Well, as far as that goes with other people in the world, you are saying to them God doesn't exist. You see what I'm saying?
Okay.
I mean, I don't know. What do you think?
It sounds like semantics to me. Let me be honest. If you're an atheist, you have no belief in God.
And let's be fair here. He's saying, hey, an atheist, like you said, means I just don't have any belief. And it's passive. Okay, that's the thing. If you're saying I believe there is no God,
that's active.
You're actively saying, I believe there is no God. And he's saying that's not the right definition. So he says, I characterized it right and then wrong. And to me, it's kind of semantics, but I'm not an atheist now, and I don't really, and when I was one, I was really probably more of an agnostic type atheist. I waffled back and forth between those. But I guess I never was a type of person who didn't even give it a thought. And I think that's kind of what he's saying. Like if an atheist is type that just says they have no belief, they're passive, he's saying it doesn't even cross their mind. Whereas it's hard for me to imagine being an atheist who wouldn't even consider it. So I don't know, Doug. He felt like that was an important
I've had some coworkers tell me that, I just don't think about it. They
just don't have any interest. Yeah,
no interest.
Yeah. Well, I will bring up. I'm trying to get a guest to come on real quick who wrote a book about secularism, and his argument is, hey, there's a whole bunch of people that live in the world and get along just fine, and they don't have any opinion on religion whatsoever. They don't care, but yet they have no belief. So maybe that's possible. Maybe I did mischaracterize it, and if I did, I'm sorry to our listener.
Okay. Well, with this guest, in his letter, he talks about his daughter having to go to a religious school.
Okay.
And it's per the state that he lives in.
Okay. He lives in a state where they actually have a country that has a Christian school. Well, I think, go ahead.
Yeah. And they teach about the Bible. They teach about, he says, about Jesus' death. When she was 4 years old, they taught about Noah's flood as a historical fact.
Now, let's be clear that this was not a Christian school. It was a public school teaching Christianity in this particular country.
It is a public school teaching Christianity. And
so he's saying that's one of the problems with faith when you force it on to people.
And I agree with him.
I do too.
Yeah.
The whole thing is, this is where we want to be real clear with him. We don't really have a problem with him. We agree, don't we?
Absolutely.
I'm not for a theocracy.
Absolutely. I am certainly not. And I can see how you become an atheist if you're forced.
Sure.
You should never be forced to learn religion, believe religion.
Religion, by definition, in my book, he'd probably say semantics again, but to me, religion, it requires a step of faith. It cannot be proven completely. It's never going to be evidentially proven. And by design, I think it's that way. They would say whatever. But it's a belief system, so it requires faith.
Yeah, you cannot drag somebody into faith.
Absolutely not.
And
it's impossible.
You'll make atheists. So
we're not for that.
In this case, I think he needs more choice. He needs school vouchers. I mean, by all means, if you have a school voucher, and now I could take my children to a Christian school if I want to and let them learn whatever. If my child's 4 years old and they're going to talk about the torture and the crucifixion of Christ, I will say something to them and say, hey, this is absolutely not right. There's so many other things you can teach about Jesus' life, his birth, his everything else.
His moral teachings, his Sermon on the Mount, Beatitudes, miracle stories, serving the poor, charity. I mean, many things.
Many things.
Well, and I mean,
when he's old enough.
Then you teach. I mean, as a pastor, I think, it's important to teach kids about about redemption. But you don't have to get into all the details. All you have to say is, he died so that He gave up his life so that we could be saved.
Right.
They don't need to hear any more than that. So some of this stuff is just distasteful teaching to me.
Yes. Yeah.
And I don't agree with
even
that.
Even Noah's flood is, there's
theories about how that happened.
Well, I mean,
sure.
It doesn't make a hill of beans as far as my faith is concerned.
Right.
There's so many other things. There's a whole book called Proverbs that is so much better to teach than Noah's flood.
Yeah.
I mean, there are so many different things you can teach in the Old Testament. If you go out to teach something in the Old Testament, there's many different things there.
Yeah, and we talked about the Exodus. What an important story that is for, many doctrines are based on that. So if I had a kid in a Christian school, I would want them to teach the Bible, absolutely. And I have had my kids in Christian school at times, and I expect them to teach the Bible. Now, here's another problem,
That's your choice,
That's
though.
my choice. And secondly, I've even had trouble there because they start teaching doctrine from another denomination.
Right.
So, I mean, we have an in-house battle, too.
Right.
And when you get in a Christian school, then you say, well, what kind of Christian? Well, I have my kids in there, and there's another school teacher who, is another denomination. And she was teaching my kids things that are totally inconsistent with our beliefs.
Right.
And then I had to argue about it at night with my kids and explain how that was wrong. Then they go back and tell their teacher. So we have these problems even within the faith.
Well,
So you need more choices even than that.
At the local Baptist camp, we had problems because we had Calvinists come in and teach us.
You have Calvinists and you have predestination, and you got others who teach Arminianism
free will,
free will and different types of free will, and there's a large spectrum on that from beliefs. And honestly, the Baptist church really came from Calvinism, but it's gone more Arminian in the years. But that's another discussion.
But
the point is, it's an in-house problem because you're trying to force people into a theocracy type, right?
That's why you need more choice. And if you want to send your kid to a Muslim school, or if you want to send them to a Catholic school or a Protestant school, or if you don't want to send them to any religious schools and you want to send them to the public school, now here's the problem with a public school.
Here's our problem back at him is what we need to say. Is he says, well, we just don't, need to send them to public school and don't teach any religion. We want to say,
if you teach no religion, then you want to teach atheism.
Yeah.
Because
you're teaching secularism by default.
Because we just fought that in our last show with, pushing back against the Stephen Hawking, right?
Right. He's making an assumption. Stephen Hawking and Hartle are saying, okay, this is the way it is because they have a point to prove too.
Right.
So they're using their bully pulpit of science to teach philosophy and theology.
Right. Right. And absolutely. Taking out the Big Bang, saying, there's
it was actually never a point. It was really curved, and we used imaginary numbers. Okay, so see, I want the listener to hear this that wrote this letter. You see, when you remove all religion, when you remove any possibility of mentioning the Bible, you can't even mention it as a possibility. You can't pray. You can't say, okay, here's the science. Now, when we get to this area, it's fuzzy, and here are some different options. That would be great. But if you bring all religion out, the secular view reigns, and by definition, by default, we are teaching atheism, and that's not really what the science says. The science is concrete in some areas and fuzzy in other areas, and so all those fuzzy areas are going to go to atheists. You see?
Absolutely.
By default.
We've seen it.
Yeah, it happens. And so that's the problem we have with saying you can't even practice your faith in a public school whatsoever. I don't think you should force anybody to do it. He brought up the argument, you guys wouldn't like it if Muslims were the majority. Then you'd be the minority. And I would say to him, I agree. I understand that.
I agree.
That's why we're not for theocracies. So, but anyway, this has been a good discussion. I hope we've been able to answer some of these pushbacks and discussions, and please send more, and we will continue to respond. So we'll basically call this show Response to Atheism.
All right, so this is God Talk Improv, where we mix up science and faith in 15 minutes. Thank you for listening.
Please visit our website at godtalk.com Our audio files can be found on iTunes, SoundCloud, and many other podcast platforms. You can find all of our God Talk videos by searching Dr. Andy and Doug on YouTube. Please visit our Facebook page at www.facebook.com/Dr. Andy and Doug. Thank you for listening.